Hi, my name is Rachel Fox, and on this edition of Voices of History, I'll be sitting down with Yvonne Neiman, who's a seasoned and dedicated psychologist practicing in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. She's also the president of a nonprofit organization helping animals, the Crossings Animal Sanctuary, with its mission to ensure every cat and dog in Bucks County, Pennsylvania has a loving home and quality care. How are you today, Yvonne?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks.
So I kind of gave a brief introduction to what you do, but I'd love for you to go into what you do as a whole as a practicing psychologist and as the president of the Crossings Animal Sanctuary.
Sure.
So, go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, let me start with what came first.
Okay.
What came first was that I became a psychologist.
Mhm.
I was licensed in Pennsylvania in 1986.
Okay.
Been practicing now for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
I treat adolescents, adults, and seniors.
Mhm.
I've been full-time in private practice the better part of that time, actually, probably about 25 years.
Okay.
And it's something that I consider to be work that I was meant to do,
Mhm.
and I love it,
Yeah.
and continue to love it.
So that's something you're passionate about, is
Absolutely.
helping other people. And so what other passions do you have that you feel have come out in your career path as a whole?
It's a good question. I think that I grew up with an orientation towards service.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever I was going to become passionate about was going to be in terms of helping other living things in one way or another.
Definitely. So you found that, how do you keep up your motivation in continuing to do this line of work?
It keeps itself up.
From day-to-day activities and...
Yeah, it's just sort of a natural thing. I think when you do work that you love, the motivation comes very, very easily. One of the things that I hear from people from time to time is, friends and clients and whatnot will be talking about how it is that, they're driving to work and they dread it, and they, they're looking forward to the weekend, and they just can't stand going to work.
Yeah.
I don't have that experience.
Yeah, you love going to work.
I really like going to work.
That's
yes.
great. And you found a way. So how do you balance between being a psychologist and practicing that throughout the week, and then also making time for your duties as the president of the nonprofit?
One of the things that's made it possible is the fact that when one is in private practice, I have some control over my schedule.
Okay.
So I can set up my schedule to do psychotherapy in a particular way and create days and times that are available for me to work with Crossings Animal Sanctuary. The other thing, quite frankly, that really helps is that the practice is downstairs in this building, and the Crossings Animal Sanctuary is just right up the stairs.
We're actually in Yvonne's offices right now in Washington's Crossing, Pennsylvania. So her psychology practice is in the bottom, and the organization's working environment is upstairs. So
Yes.
I'm sure that makes it very convenient to work in both aspects.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great. So how did you decide, I know you briefly were saying how you got started in this. When did starting an animal nonprofit come about? When was that kind of in the history of your career that did you decide, I want to make an impact on a community?
Well, I came home from graduate school. I actually had graduated, had started working under the supervision of a psychologist. I was down south, went to Auburn University,
Okay.
had crossed over the state line, gone to Columbus, Georgia, and been in practice for a few years. And then in 1985, decided that it was time for me to make a move. And I came back to this area where I had grown up. And at that time, my mother had gotten together with two other women.
Okay.
She actually went to at Tyler Park once a year. They have a deer hunt.
Oh my gosh.
And there is a protest group
Oh.
that is at the deer hunt every year.
Was your mom heading that?
She wasn't heading it, but she was there, and she met two other women.
Okay.
Their names are Hope and Tarita, and they started an organization called Hope for the Animals, which eventually became, in its time, the largest dog and cat rescue organization in Bucks County. So over the years, I was sort of on the periphery of that, would hear my mom talking about it. That was her passion.
Right.
And then in 2005, toward the end of 2005, I had two dogs, Boris and Natasha. Natasha was a golden retriever.
Okay.
Boris was a boxer.
Oh.
And they died within 4 months of each other.
Wow.
And being a psychologist, and having some idea of, what the grieving process is. I did a couple of things. One was I went to my mom and I said, look, I know that I love to have dogs in my household, but I want a little bit of time. So are there cats available? And a couple of days after Boris passed away, and he was the dog who died last, I adopted 2 cats.
Oh, great.
Serena and Sophie, who are sisters.
Oh.
And actually they're still in my home.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
The other thing that I did was I went to my mom. At that time, Hope for the Animals was doing very well. And I said, look, in what's happened with Boris and Natasha, I have become very well acquainted with the cost of emergency veterinary care. What would you think about the possibility of creating a fund for people who are responsible pet owners but can't afford to pay those kinds of bills?
Yeah, that's something I feel like that every organization could kind of consider within its community. That's great.
Well, actually, now I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we are now one of 3 organizations in this geographic area that actually has that kind of fund. So Boris and Natasha's Fund was born, and that was my entree into animal welfare.
Okay.
Then, as I became a little bit more involved, I started becoming aware of sort of the business aspect of what was going on. And one of the things that happens with nonprofit organizations is they tend to start as grassroots, and then when they get large enough, they shift to a business model.
Okay.
Well, Hope for the Animals was large enough and successful enough, but they hadn't made the shift yet.
Oh, interesting.
So I went to my mom, who was the president of the organization at the time, and I said, how about you go to the board, why don't we open an administrative office?
Yeah.
And start to, systematize things, get things on computer, but run from a central core.
Right.
So I became the volunteer executive director of Hope for the Animals, and stayed with them for, it's probably a total of about 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
At which point, there had been a lot of talk about building a no-kill shelter. And one of the things that's very, very difficult to do when you're doing rescue work, if you're doing it the way it should be done with excellence, it's full-time. You have no time for anything else. So even though Hope for the Animals had the available funds to really start looking at this seriously, they really didn't have the time and the resources.
Or the manpower, I'm sure, to kind of fulfill that need, right?
The business personnel, yes. Yeah. Lots of people, extremely dedicated.
Right.
Very, very passionate, but they were doing rescue work. And really, when you talk about a no-kill shelter, you've got to be coming from a business model.
Definitely.
So there were several of us that then broke away and formed the Crossings Animal Sanctuary. So we've been in existence for about 5 years. And right now there are 2 primary planks to our mission.
Okay.
One is to build the first no-kill dog and cat sanctuary in Bucks County.
Much needed.
And the other is something that we created this past year called United Paw.
Great.
And the way that United Paw works is that we provide services that directly help dogs and cats. Actually, Boris and Natasha's Fund followed me after a couple of years. We sort of restarted that with the Crossings Animal Sanctuary. We also have begun a hotline.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Called the Animal Help and Adoption Network. And we're sort of a referral source, but we also work with the rescues in the area.
Kind of bridge the gap between community and other rescues. Yeah.
Yes. And what happens is, because there are so many rescue organizations, and they tend to be small and they tend to be grassroots, when people are looking to adopt a dog or a cat, or if there's a problem, they don't know who to call.
Right.
Or sometimes if they do call, people in rescue organizations tend to have full-time jobs, and it may take a while until they get a return call. So we wanted to fill the gap.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And then the third one is called Rescue Assistance.
Okay.
And that's where we work directly with the rescue organizations to help get their homeless dogs and cats adopted.
Have you had a number of dogs that have come through that assistance program so far already, or?
Well, I'll tell you one story.
Okay, that would be great.
There is a dog that right now we have a relationship with a place called Central Bark, which is a doggy daycare in Fairless Hills. And we had a situation with a dog who was a big 11-year-old lab who was placed in a household with 4 very small Chihuahuas.
Wow.
All of the dogs unspayed and unneutered, and the story sort of goes on from there. As it turned out, the lab injured, seriously injured, 1 Chihuahua, and then we got a call for the second Chihuahua. And long story short, we ended up not being involved in doing the surgery for the Chihuahua. That was handled by the veterinary practice. Okay. But what we did do was we asked that this dog, whose name is Strider, the lab, be surrendered to us.
Okay. And what is surrendering, just so?
Surrender basically means that dogs, the thing to understand about dogs and cats in the state of Pennsylvania is that they're property by law.
Right.
So we don't use the word owner, we just say person.
Okay.
But technically speaking, the adults in that household owned the dog. Okay. So when you surrender or relinquish, you actually have to sign papers, wow, that says we are giving this piece of property to you. So that's what they did. Okay. And we got Strider over at Central Park. Because Strider had been involved in seriously injuring dogs, there were too many liability issues involved in any rescue in the area. Taking responsibility, and quite frankly for us as well. Yeah. So what we did was we reached out to Best Friends Animal Sanctuary in Utah. Okay. And went through an application process, and Strider has been accepted.
That's great.
And we are now making arrangements to fly Strider along with our administrative manager. Wow. Out to Utah. Yeah. And that will probably be a combination of commercial, and there are also pilots who donate their time to transport dogs and cats.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so we're very, very happy about that. And in the meantime, in the time that Strider has been over at Central Park, what they have discovered is that this is not an aggressive dog at all. Wow. The dog is a favorite of not only staff, but people who come to drop their dogs off. People stop by and see him. People bring him treats. Yeah. He's just a great, great dog who was just placed in a situation where through no fault of his own, he ended up injuring 2 dogs he never should have been with.
Yeah. So I'm sure you see that in the nonprofit world. You see a lot of stories like that unfolding, and it's something that you unfortunately have to deal with reoccurringly and coming up. Yes. So, but that's a huge accomplishment, having Strider introduced into this facility in Utah, so that's great. Yes. What other accomplishments do you feel like that you've really taken strides in making a difference in the Bucks County community, surrounding areas, with starting up this organization?
Well, with Boris and Natasha's fund, in the 5 years that we've been in existence, we really took Boris and Natasha's fund in our 3rd year. Okay. So we have probably raised and spent $50,000 to $60,000. Wow. Being able to help dogs and cats.
That's great.
Medically. Yeah. And the dogs and cats we help fall into 2 categories. Okay. Either they are in homes, in families that are responsible pet owners but are constrained financially, or they're in rescues. They're homeless and in rescues. And whatever it is that's needed medically, the rescue can't afford. Okay. Yeah. So that's been one of the other things we've been really, really proud of. Yeah. And we are on our way to raising money to build the first no-kill dog and cat sanctuary in Bucks County.
Which is a great accomplishment within itself, and just having an organization that's able to fulfill that mission is wonderful. What continues to motivate you to this line of work and to keep being an activist in the community?
Well, I think there are several things. First of all, I'm passionate about the work. And truly, people have talked to me about, things may get to the point with Crossings Animal Sanctuary where you don't need to do psychotherapy anymore, and I say, no.
And why do you say that, though? Why do you think?
Because psychotherapy is my life's work. Okay. And I'm still passionate about both. And I like them for different reasons.
Definitely.
One of the things about doing therapy is the confidentiality. So I'm not in a situation where I can go into any kind of social situation and talk about my work in any specific way. Yeah. And when you've been doing it for 30 years, that's not an easy thing.
I'm sure.
Because things happen, and, there are some times where you'd really like to say, guess what happened to me today. You really can't do that. But I love the work. Good. And one of the things that's really rewarding is to work with somebody to see the potential that they have,
Mm-hmm.
and to work with them, you know, so that they start moving closer and closer and closer to that potential,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, living more fulfilling and happier lives.
Yeah,
And that's just been, it's been enormously gratifying.
I'm sure.
And it's something that, one of the things that's true about my line of work is that the older you get, the better you, if it's work you're meant to do,
Mhm.
the older you get, the better you get at it.
Yeah, I would hope that's, you know, fulfilling
Mhm.
your own career, your life, and moving that way.
Well, there's something about, no matter what your training is, life experience really counts.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be equivalent experience
Right.
to what that person has, but the fact that you have more to draw from yourself,
Mhm.
it makes one better doing psychotherapy. And the other thing is we tend to retire very late, if at all.
For doing as a psychotherapist, right?
For doing psychotherapy. Psychologists, generally speaking, you don't, for those of us who are doing psychotherapy,
Mhm.
you tend not to see us retiring at 65 years old.
Mhm.
You see us retiring, again, if at all,
Interesting.
75, 80,
Yeah.
sometimes beyond that, as long as we're cognitively intact.
So you see your career continuing
Mhm.
for quite a number of years in the future. Well, that's
Absolutely.
great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that part I remain really passionate about.
Yeah.
The Crossings Animal Sanctuary, it's just sort of fulfills just kind of another area for me.
Yeah.
First of all, I can talk about it,
Yeah.
which
sure that's nice.
is nice. The other thing is that it's very varied,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in all of the things that can be done.
Yeah.
A lot of what I like is actually in the business end of things.
Okay.
I do a lot of writing for social media, for
Mhm.
example.
Yeah.
I really enjoy doing that. I'm involved in a lot of fundraising and really enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
And then there are the nuts and bolts that are involved when we need to help a dog or
Yeah.
cat.
Multiple facets of
Mhm.
the nonprofit coming out, and even the business aspect, which is
Yes.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Get your hands dirty and all and
Yep,
everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the variety is really nice.
Yeah, that's great.
But I think one of the things that I think is just important, and it's just sort of the way that I function, is
Mhm.
that it doesn't have to be immediate, but
Right.
I like to see results.
Yes, definitely.
And it's a really gratifying thing to know
Mhm.
that I was involved in something,
Mhm.
and this is the net result of it.
Right. From the beginning, even coming from your mother's organization and what she was a part of, and kind of starting from the ground up, I definitely think that's accomplishment in itself. And
Mhm.
you know, but looking back, do you feel as if there were certain things that helped you get where you are today? Would you look back on a certain piece of advice and say that really helped me continue to move forward in my career and as a person?
In one respect,
Mhm.
in terms of just sort of the paths that I took, it wasn't so much advice as it was, there were just sort of kind of preliminary ideas and then points along the way that meant that, you know, I was going to take this road as opposed to this one.
Right.
For example, I knew that I wanted to be in a helping profession from the time I was a teenager.
Mhm.
And at that time, my grandfather and I were really close. And I thought first I was going to be a social worker.
Okay.
So I went and talked to my grandfather,
Mhm.
and I said, what I really want to do is I want to become a social worker, and I want to go into the slums of Philadelphia
Wow.
and work there. And he said, over my dead body.
Oh wow, yeah. He's like, you're not getting into that danger, right?
So he was very influential in my life.
Uh-huh.
And again, I took a turn in the road.
Right.
I think also, without going into a lot of detail, for the people that I know who became psychologists,
Mhm.
who are really good at doing therapy,
Mhm.
they come from family backgrounds
Okay.
where there is a parent that they want to save that they couldn't.
Mhm.
And I'm no exception to that.
Mhm.
Again, without going into more detail about
Mhm. Yeah, that's okay.
that. So, in terms of my becoming a psychologist,
Mhm. You
know,
definitely had
that's-
some influential people in your life. That,
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. With regard to animal welfare, it was a combination of things again.
Mhm.
It was the fact that my parents were running a rescue organization when my two dogs passed away,
Right.
and it opened up an opportunity.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that as my parents have aged,
Mhm.
they are now not active actively involved in animal welfare, but they still care very much. And they had always wanted to build a no-kill shelter.
Okay.
So part of this is my parents' legacy as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's just more than anything else, it's just sort of turns in the road, you know, and responses to particular things that happened. With regard to being in private practice, there was advice.
Okay.
I was still down in Georgia, and there was a dear friend of mine who was in marketing.
Okay.
And when I was exploring the possibility of coming back here, I just got the Yellow Pages, because you used the Yellow Pages
back
at
then.
that time. And I started making telephone calls and spoke with psychologists who were in private practice, a lot of whom were, you know, very, very nice and very, very helpful. But a number of whom said, you know, you really ought to think twice about this. The market is saturated.
Interesting.
So I had a discussion with my marketing friend, and he said, look, here's the deal. What they're telling you is, by the fact that there are so many people in Bucks County doing this for a living, is that there is a market for it.
Right. You just have to be really good at what you're doing.
Well, he said there are two things.
Yeah.
He said, don't get too concerned about being told that the market is saturated.
Okay. Yeah.
Instead, he said, focus on the fact that you're very good at what you do, and in order to succeed in what's considered a saturated market, you need to be charging a fair price, and you need to be good at what you do.
Yeah.
So as long as you do that, you'll be fine.
And that advice is held true, and
It's been very helpful.
good.
And it gave me the courage to go out
actually,
there and try.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that, and I don't know that this was necessarily advice or just something that I felt, but when managed care came into the marketplace, it scared a lot of practitioners.
Really?
And a lot of practitioners capitulated to managed care.
Okay.
And this is probably more a function of my personality than anything else, but I really felt very, very strongly that the managed care model was not ethical, and that it was driven solely by the bottom line.
Do you, by managed care, I'm sorry to cut your idea off, but do you mean the practice between psychiatrist or psychologist and patient, or?
Managed care came into being in the late 1980s.
Okay.
And basically what it was, the way that they sold this was that there were rampant abuses in medicine and in psychology and psychiatry.
Okay.
More psychiatry, quite frankly, than psychology, but we got sort of broad brushed into it. And that there needed to be sort of an intermediary between the insurance companies and the practitioners to make sure that we were minding our P's and Q's, and not, you know, not wasting money.
Okay.
And the truth was that, you know, there's an old saying, lies, damn lies, and statistics. That the way that they presented this to business, business bought it. They believed it.
Okay.
And for psychologists, and actually for most of mental health, there was just a little area in mental health where abuses were occurring, and it was in the 1980s, and it was with psychiatry. There were two areas in psychiatry that were not being monitored. One was drug and alcohol, and the other one was inpatient adolescent units.
Okay.
And they ran up utilization 500% within a year or two.
Wow.
And what happened was that the managed care people, the people who were promoting managed care companies, used that to promote their idea.
All right.
And when you've got a 500% jump in utilization, even when you average it out across everything, inpatient, outpatient, mental health, it looks as if there are abuses across the board. That's how I got in.
Interesting.
And they have been making a mess of, in my opinion, medicine and mental health ever since. Ever since.
Right. So how does that change your perception on you practicing as a psychologist now within these restrictions a little bit?
Well, what happened was that in the beginning, the managed care companies approached us, and they, you know, gave their presentation and promised us that, you know, we could practice in the way that we saw fit, and they wouldn't interfere. And that lasted about 2 or 3 years until they were interfering quite a bit.
Okay.
And At that time, it was a group practice, so we all got together, we sat down, and we resigned every contract we had.
Wow.
And we walked away.
Wow.
And we became an independent private practice.
Okay.
Now, with the Affordable Health Care Act, that changes things a little bit. And it's not so much that we're dealing with managed care per se, but unless somebody is able to pay out of pocket for services
Right.
and not get reimbursed, everything is going to either being an HMO or a PPO.
Okay.
So we are starting to join the PPO organizations that we feel operate reasonably ethically.
Yeah.
But we were out of the loop for probably the better part of 20 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely a big impact, I feel, on the community as a whole, but as well as having an independent practice. That's definitely something that you see results from, or negative or positive.
Well, what it did was it enabled us to practice in the way that we wanted.
Well, that's a benefit.
That's an absolute benefit. It's to us, but also to the people that we serve, because we didn't have to answer to an entity that was monitoring us, that was telling us how to do our work, and that could kick us out of a network at a moment's notice because they're not regulated.
Well, from knowing you, I know that in your personality, you don't take things lying down if they're over your value system in any means, which is very respected. And I can see that going through into the animal nonprofit and the crossings as a whole. So you see yourself continuing with both works, you were saying, in the future, and what kind of do you see for the organization as a whole in moving forward? I kind of see where your practice is going, but
well, I think there are two parts to the Crossings Animal Sanctuary. We were a little bit dewy-eyed about the sanctuary when we started out. We thought we could implement a 5 to 7 year plan and build a $5 million sanctuary.
expensive.
And it's probably going to take at least double that amount of time.
Okay.
But the fact of the matter is, I mean, just to go back to talking about Strider,
Yeah.
we were very, very lucky in getting Strider admitted to Best Friends. It's probably the 6th or 7th time we've tried to do that.
Wow.
Best Friends is one of the few large no-kill sanctuaries in the country
Okay.
that would take a referral like this. And we were told that they are getting approximately 3,000 requests for dogs alone per month.
Per month, and you got Strider in.
And we got
Wow.
Strider in.
Yeah.
But that's not the norm. We, for a variety of reasons, we got very, very lucky this time. And just to give you an example, we tried a couple of no-kill sanctuaries on the East Coast first.
Okay.
They were filled.
Wow.
There was just no place. So had we not been able to get Strider a home,
Yeah.
Strider would be dead.
Wow.
It's just that simple.
Right.
So one of the things we want to do is we want to have our own place, so that when something like that occurs,
Yeah, you'll have a home.
that's right, and we would have we would be established to the degree that we could do what Best Friends does, because
And
Best
take in
Friends
others.
is not only going to take him in, Best Friends is going to train Strider, and
Wow.
I would predict that within 6 months Strider's going to be adopted out,
That's
even as a senior
great.
dog.
Yeah, I
This is
don't.
a wonderful dog.
Wow, and that's a great program that Best Friends has in their facilities. So that's something that I'm sure you've looked at other facilities and something you want to mirror in
Yes.
your own practices and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have a concept plan for the sanctuary, and we were working with an architect to do that, and we visited. There were 4 different facilities that we actually went on site and took
Okay.
a look at, and took a look at best practices. So we know what we want to do.
Yeah.
And, again, as sort of background information for all of that. When the no-kill movement started, which is now 15, 20 years ago, approximately 14 to 15 million dogs and cats were being put to death in our nation's shelters every year.
Wow.
That number is now down to, depending upon who you're talking to, the low number is 3 million.
Okay.
It's
But
somewhere between 3 million
Drastic
and 5.
change, yeah.
It's a drastic change.
Right.
But it still makes our nation's shelters the single largest killer of dogs and cats.
Yeah.
The model needed to change.
Yeah.
And what we know now is that it is possible, utilizing no-kill philosophy, that you can save between 95 and 98% of all homeless animals in a given
Wow.
geographic area.
Yeah.
And that is what we're aiming for in this geographic area.
Mm-hmm.
The sanctuary is part of that. The sanctuary won't be able to do the whole job,
Okay.
but there is a model from which we're operating
Mm-hmm.
where that can be accomplished.
Yeah, that's great.
So going forward,
Mm-hmm.
that's what we want. We
Mm-hmm.
want to be living in a geographic area where we are saving, because we are stewards of the four-leggeds.
Yes.
And
They can't speak. We have to do it for them.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And they are companion animals.
Yes, they
They're
are.
serving us.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to serve them.
Yeah.
And that means that the needless killing in our
Mm-hmm.
nation's shelters needs to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And people need to stop calling it euthanasia.
Yeah. It's completely
Euthanasia
different.
is mercy killing.
Mm-hmm.
And actually in the no-kill movement, we are in favor of euthanasia. Euthanasia means that you are putting a dog or cat down who is suffering as a result of non-recoverable illness or injury.
Mm-hmm.
That's euthanasia.
No exception.
Everything else is killing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So that's part of it.
Yeah.
And the other part of it is to really establish a network
Mm-hmm.
in Bucks County where we're sort of kind of the hub of the wheel,
Mm-hmm.
and working with the organizations, the animal welfare organizations, the rescues in the area,
Mm-hmm.
to do everything that we can to facilitate adoption,
Yeah.
to help them accomplish their mission,
Mm-hmm.
to raise awareness, to educate people,
Mm-hmm.
and to do everything we can to directly help dogs and cats.
Yes, that's a great projection for the future, and
Mm-hmm.
I know it would be successful. And my next question is kind of broader, and maybe difficult to for you to kind of pinpoint. But what do you feel is one of your biggest successes and accomplishments throughout your career? And looking back, and what are you just really proud of that you're able to have under your belt, and moving forward and say, I did this in my lifetime? And
It's actually something we haven't talked about so far.
okay, great. I'd love to hear.
When I came back into the area,
Mm-hmm.
and I was starting to get established in private practice,
Mhm.
I needed to have a job that had a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
So I became a staff psychologist over at Trenton State Prison.
Okay.
And within the period of time that I worked there, one
Mhm.
of the things that I did was I ran a group.
Mm-hmm.
And we got pretty tight in that group.
Mm-hmm. For the prisoners, you mean?
For the prisoners,
Okay.
yes. Yep, there were, I think, 7 or 8 guys
Wow.
that I worked with.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, his name was Jose Luis Velez
Mhm.
Jr. Went by the name of Indio because
Okay.
it's Spanish for Indian. He looked like he was Indian,
Mm-hmm.
in American Indian. And he was this little squirt of a guy,
Mm-hmm.
but brilliant, absolutely
Really?
brilliant. And he's one of those people that just fell through the cracks. Doesn't even begin to describe it.
Yeah.
It was just one bad thing after another.
Mm-hmm.
And he turned out to do some really terrible things in his life,
I'm sure.
and was incarcerated repeatedly.
Mm-hmm.
But that stuff doesn't occur in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about a tremendous amount of abuse and neglect in his life,
Mm-hmm.
and just not having any adult available
Right.
that he could cling to, who could help
Pull him out of it. Yeah.
So, among the things that happened, and actually how I came to meet him, was that he became a heroin addict,
Wow.
and he started robbing places, armed robberies,
Mm-hmm.
and he was incarcerated for a string of armed robberies.
Okay.
Truth be told, in this group,
Mm-hmm.
he became my co-therapist.
Really?
There was a social worker there. He was actually much better than the social worker.
That's funny.
Really bright, really insightful,
Mhm.
had a tremendous amount to offer, and really just sort of epitomized how, if things had been different,
Mm-hmm.
I talked about, the fact that, I was choosing
Different
in forks of the
paths,
road.
yeah.
The path, I think, would have been very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
So, after I left employment
Mhm.
with the state of New Jersey and went full-time private practice,
Mhm.
I stayed in touch with a number of prisoners. And that was the mid-1980s, late 1980s by that time. And that was when AIDS was rampant,
Okay.
and he was a heroin
Wow.
addict.
Yeah.
And he was diagnosed.
Oh, shame.
And it was brutal. It was
Yeah.
absolutely brutal.
I'm sure.
His opportunistic infection was brain cancer.
Oh my gosh.
And at one point, what happened was that he had a stroke and paralyzed his entire right side, put him in the hospital weighing over at Helene Fould in Trenton.
Wow.
And while all of this was going on, I actually started establishing a relationship with his family.
Wow, okay.
Up in Newark. So one of the things that he wanted to do, he had 3 children.
Okay.
One of them was older and living down south, but the other 2 were young boys. And he wanted to go home.
Wow.
And he was dying.
Oh my gosh.
So I decided that we were going to get him medical clemency. And I made my entire staff nuts for 3 months.
Trying to
because
help, yeah.
I put it in front of me. And that is one thing I will say in terms of advice. You want to accomplish something that means something to you, you put it right in front of you, eyes on the prize, and you don't take your eyes off of it.
Yeah, that's great.
And
yeah, that's good advice.
Obviously, you stay within ethical parameters to get it done,
Right.
but that's how you do it. You don't let anything stop you. By the time we were done, we had 4 U.S. Congress people
Wow.
and a New Jersey state senator
Yeah.
involved in this.
Wow.
He had the rap sheet from hell,
I'm sure.
but in the end, it was luck that did it. Governor Kane in New Jersey was going out of office, and he was a lame duck at that point.
Okay.
And there was not going to be any political fallout if he signed the clemency papers.
Yeah.
So he did.
Wow.
And Indio was moved from,
That's okay.
from the prison unit to a med-surg floor, and he died 6 days later.
Oh my gosh. He didn't die in prison though.
He didn't die in prison.
Yeah, that's a
Died
great
from him.
accomplishment, like helping him, and I feel like that incorporates your own values and seeing kind of almost as the psychologist in you coming out, but as a person too, and the connections you make, and it's definitely a touching story and something I'm sure you'll remember for years and years to come. Yeah.
Well, actually, I still have, we haven't, because we've just moved offices recently, but usually up on my wall is I actually have the original papers from the governor of New Jersey with the
Wow,
honor seal.
that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
That's really great.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
actually consider that to be my greatest accomplishment.
That is a great accomplishment. I would not argue that. And you said during your story that one of the main advice that you would give is to focus on one thing and keep going after that with persistence, obviously ethical issues in mind and whatever else. But so do you feel as if that's your strongest piece of advice for younger generations moving forward in?
It's one of them.
Okay.
One of the other ones is follow your passion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Meaningful work is really, really, really important. It's really important. It makes all of the difference because you're going to be spending a whole lot of time doing what you do to earn a living.
Definitely.
You should love it. You should be able to go to work and not even feel like it's work.
And you've said in the beginning of our interview, you said that that's how you feel. So that's wonderful that your passions have got you to where you are and have continued to help motivate you stay in this line of work and to go forward. And I think that's great.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for sitting down with us today and discussing where you've been in your career and where you see it projecting forward. And thank you guys for watching.